Welcome back, boys and girls, for our reading of the introduction book on logic for forallX, which is an open source book. And last time we finished the introduction of the basic rules for conjunction. And now we read what is disjunction, and we'll also discuss conditionals. So if M were true, then M or N would also be true. So this disjunction introduction rule or introduction allows us to derive a disjunction if we have one of two disjuncts. So this is a new rule here. When I have A, I can always also say A or B or C or whatever. And we call this the OR rule, the OR introduction rule applied to whatever line M we have. And of course, we can also introduce it in, we can switch positions, and of course, we can introduce also more complex propositions. So notice that B can be any sentence whatsoever, so the following is a legitimate proof. M, and then we have an introduction to 1, which is an introduction of the term OR, and then we have M OR and a very complex proposition. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, they say it may seem odd that just by knowing M we can derive a conclusion that includes a sentence like A, B, and the rest sentences that have nothing to do with M. Yet the conclusions follows immediately by OR introduction. This is as it should be. The truth conditions for the disjunction mean that if A is true, then A or B is true regardless of what B is. And let's see what they have here. Here it seems they have a proof. So we have two sentences, M and N. Oh, this is the elimination rule, right? If we have A or B and we see B is not true, then we are allowed to apply the elimination rule to two lines, and we are allowed to conclude A. And the same is true when we have A or B and we have not A, then we are allowed to conclude by virtue of elimination that we have B. However, if we have A, we are not allowed to conclude B or not B, because it's or and. Yeah, it's not an either or, right? So, okay, let's go to the conditional. So now we have an argument that R or F, and from that follows that if not R, then F. Yeah, that makes sense, because if this sentence is true and not R is given, then we need to conclude that there's F. So let's read on. So the argument is certainly a valid one. What should the conditional instruction rule be such that we can draw this conclusion? We begin the proof by writing down the premise of the argument and drawing a horizontal line like this. Okay, if we had not R as a further premise, we could derive F by the OR elimination rule. If we had not R as a further premise, which we don't have, we could derive F by the OR elimination rule. Yeah, that's clear. We do not have not R as a premise of this argument, nor can we derive it directly from the premise we do have. So we cannot simply prove F. That's true. What we will do instead is start a subproof, a proof within the main proof. When we start a subproof, we draw another vertical line to indicate that we are no longer in the main proof. Then we write in an assumption for the subproof. This can be anything we want. Here it will be helpful to assume not R. Our proof now looks like this. So, okay, we assume not R for this instance, and if we assume not R, then we can actually also conclude by virtue of the OR elimination applied to line 1 and 2, F. And we have proven this OR elimination or introduced that elimination rule before. So this has shown if we had not R as a premise, then we could prove F. In effect, we have proven if not R, then F. So the conditional introduction rule will allow us to close the subproof and derive not R then F in the main proof. Our final proof looks like this. So if not R, then F. And now we have an introduction rule that we apply to line 2 and 3. So whenever we have such a subproof, then we are actually allowed to conclude that if not R, then F. We are allowed to conclude in terms of a conditional. Yeah. I just wonder if we should write introduction rule for 1, including 2, 3. I wonder if this is complete, so I'm not really understanding this. So if you understand why I don't have reference here for the rule to 1, then please let me know. Because just applying that to R and F without having like the first line seems to me a bit weird. But maybe it is because we have the elimination rule included. Well, let me know in the comments if you have an idea. Notice that the justification for applying the introduction conditional rule is the entire subproof. Usually that will be more than just 2 lines. It may seem as if the ability to assume anything at all in a subproof would lead to chaos. Does it allow to prove any conclusion from any premise? The answer is no, it does not. Consider the following proof. So is this here really a good way of doing it? That's the question. And it seems the answer they give, or it does not seem, the answer they give is no. So if we have A, and then we introduce B, and from B by rule of iteration follows B, it may seem as if this is a proof that you can derive any conclusions B from any premise A. When the vertical line for the subproof ends, the subproof is closed. In order to complete a proof, you must close all the subproofs. And you cannot close the subproof and use the R rule again on line 4 to derive B in the main proof. Once you close the subproof, you cannot refer back to individual lines inside. Yeah, so closing it, we have to have a rule for why we close it, right? That's how I understand it. So we close it here with the introduction rule. And here we cannot just reiterate by closing the proof. That would make no sense. Closing a subproof is called discharging the assumptions of that subproof. So we can put the point this way. You cannot complete a proof until you have discharged all of the assumptions besides the original premises of the argument. Of course, it is legitimate to do it like this. A, we assume B, and then it's right that we have B, and now we close and we introduce the conditional to 2 and 3, and we conclude from B follows B. Does that mean that we conclude that there's B? No. B could not be true, right? If B is not true, follows that B is not true. And false follows false. Well, that would be at least, can also be true. So this should not seem strange though, since from B follows B, if B then B, is a tautology. No particular premises should be required to validly derive it. And these, as we will see, the tautology follows from any premises. So it seems I can just always introduce from B follows B, right? Can always introduce a tautology, maybe. Because assuming from B follows B does not saying that B, right? Yeah. I think that's what it is. So put in a general form, the I rule looks like this. The introduction rule for conditionals looks like this. If we have M and N, and we have a subproof of A, and we want B, and then we have B, holy guacamole, I don't understand this. So when we introduce a subproof, we typically write what we want to derive in the column. This is just so that we do not forget why we started the subproof if it goes for 5 or 10 lines. There is no want rule. It is a note to ourselves and not formally part of the proof. So we have A, and if A, then B. So and then we are allowed to conclude if A, then B. I don't understand that. I need more examples for this here. Although it is always permissible to open a subproof with any assumption you please, there's some strategy involved in picking a useful assumption. Starting a subproof with an arbitrary wacky assumption would just waste lines of the proof. In order to derive a conditional by the conjunction introduction, for instance, you must assume the antecedent of the conditional in a subproof. So you should always start with the antecedent. The antecedent is in A follows B. If A, then B. The antecedent is the A, while B is the consequent. The conjunction introduction rule also requires that the consequent of the conditional be the last line of the subproof. It is also permissible to close the subproof and discharge its assumption, but it will not be helpful to do so until you get what you want. Now consider the conditional elimination rule. Nothing follows from if M then N alone, but if we have both if M then N and M, then we can conclude N. This rule, modus ponens, will be the conditional elimination rule. Okay, let's look here. So we have M. Yeah, we have A and then B follows. I just don't really understand here the introduction rule. So we have A and we want B, then we have B, then A follows B. If A, then B. So we have A and also B, and only if we have A, then B, but we have A, therefore we can conclude if we assume A and B as a given. Oh, now I have it, right? Now I have it. Bit complicated here, but so like this is a subproof. So I assume A. And if, for whatever further reason, there is also a B given in that instance, then we can conclude if A, then B. But we cannot start with B. B is given. We assume what happens if B is given, and then we say also A is given. From that, we are not allowed to conclude that if A, then B, because we started with B, right? So A can also, B can also mean that there is not A. Yeah, I think that is right. That's the truth table for conjunctions. I hope you can follow me on that. If not, then please ask questions. See, what I feel so difficult about this, it's not the natural proof deduction. Once you have the rules clear, you can just do your schemes and just apply your rules all the time and just be accurate about it. What is difficult is to understand the way the whole system takes off ground. And this system is supposed to mimic the way we really think. But sometimes still, when we formalize it, it's a little bit like, wait, that's really how I think? Yeah, we think that way if we try to talk about the truth, right? Okay. So we have here the elimination rule. Now that we have the rules, consider this argument. If P then Q, if Q then R, and from that follows if P then R. So we have here transitivity. That means that we can say that from P follows R if we have such an argument in Q is the middle term. Let's say it that way. So we begin the proof by writing the two premises as assumptions. Since the main logical operator in the conclusion is a conditional, we can expect to use the conditional I rule. For that, we need a subproof, so we write in the antecedent of the conditional as assumption of a subproof. Okay, so we have here the two lines, so we want to prove them, so we assume that P. We made P available by assuming it in a subproof, allowing us to use the conditional elimination on the first premise. This gives us Q, which allows us to use the introduction condition or the elimination conditional of E, the conditional elimination on the second premise. Having derived R, we close the subproof by assuming P, we were able to prove R. So we apply the conditional I rule, the conditional introduction rule, and finish the proof. I'm sorry. Let's look into the example. That may be clearer, because that's supposed to be the way we think. Okay, so what do we have here? We remind us that we want to get to R. That's the whole purpose. That's the antecedent. The consequent, R is the consequent, P is the antecedent. Okay, and now we say P, and if P then Q. We also assume Q, and by virtue of elimination, applying it to 1, and 3. Oh, wait. We have elimination here, right? We have the elimination rule here. So it applies to the fourth line. So we have P, and now we have the elimination rule that we apply to the first line and to the third line, and then we are allowed, because we have already introduced that elimination rule, we are allowed to conclude Q, but only for the subproof. Okay, and now we have Q, and we apply the same elimination rule of conditional again by applying 4 or 2 to 4, and then we are allowed to conclude R. So now we have all the subproofs, and now we just take the third line and the fifth line. So P is given and R is given, and we apply the conditional elimination rule, and we can conclude from P follows R. And this rule we have just, the elimination rule we have just shown here, right? So we just applied that. And I think I understood the elimination rule correctly. Okay. So Spark approves this post as it has much logic in it. We really do some formal logic here. And dialectics is maybe even another way of how we think. A richer way where we develop concepts and then we see what we can say with regard to these concepts. But I think formal logic, which this meme here rejects, it's not so bad. It just tries to really understand our thinking in a very formal way. And it is about the way of how we preserve truth. How do we preserve truth? By following some rules that we justify to ourselves. And we just want to make the rules of these forms of truth preservation transparent to us. And actually, we use these rules very often, and they are very helpful for us, for example, in mathematics and so on. And we shouldn't doubt that. So ridiculing it like this, I think this is often done by continental philosophers who are a little bit disrespectful. So I consider myself more to be a continental philosopher, but analytic philosophy is a really important brick that can help us understand our own thinking. So thank you very much for watching. Sorry for being a bit confused, but I want to go with you together through my confusions, and maybe you can help me. If I said something wrong, then let me know in the comments. Other than that, if you like this form of dialogue that we have with each other, please subscribe, give the video a like, and let's go on with this kind of reading in the future. So live long, do more logic, and prosper. Bye-bye.